Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Wittgenstein Aficionados. In today's episode, we're introduced to the term language games, and this might be the very term whose name is mentioned most often in documentaries about Wittgenstein or summaries of his philosophy. It's a wholly new view of what language is compared to its predecessors, and that's probably why it gets so much buzz. So you can compare it to like cosmological theories of the planet, for example, of which there have been plenty. The ancient Greeks had their own cosmology, the Roman Catholics had their own cosmology, Copernicus laid the foundations of a scientific cosmology, and so on. So equally with the language, there have been ideas of what language is, and then this idea of language games is a entirely original idea. And surprisingly, and well, perhaps not that surprisingly, there haven't been any really radically different ideas of how language works until the 20th century, when a logician philosopher called Gottlob Frege came up with a pretty unprecedented idea and that stressed the importance of language to philosophy. And Wittgenstein was heavily influenced by Frege in his early years, but his idea of language games is wholly original, and there isn't really anyone who had thought along these lines before him. So there are several reasons for why he compared language to games, and at the end of the video we'll compare the builder's language to Monopoly for the fun of it, and hopefully you'll see that there is good reason for why one might draw that comparison between language and games. Okay, so in the first 3 sentences of paragraph 7, Wittgenstein specifies 2 scenarios that we're already acquainted with. The language of paragraph 2, where one party calls out for stones and the other party that reacts to this call. This is the language of the Society of the Builders. And the second scenario is the preliminary teaching required to induct people into the language. And here he mentions the exercises that goes with it, such as uttering the name of an object and the even simpler exercise of repeating the words of the teacher. And this is, as you might recall, the ostensive teaching of words from paragraph 6. And Wittgenstein adds at the end here that both of them being speech-like processes. So why does he say that? Well, slab is one of 4 words in the builder's language. It's a request for the assistant to bring a certain stone. That's what slab means, you could say. However, the children are not requesting stones when they are trained. They're learning a name by parroting their teacher. And are we to call their parroting a language? Well, at the very least, we can call it a speech-like process, although it's not slab in the language of the builders, so to speak. And next, he compares the use of words in the language of the builders with those games by which children learn their native language. And I honestly don't know any word games that has to do with language acquisition, or I've forgotten all of them. Nonetheless, I take it that he wants to stress a similarity between 2 seemingly different phenomenons, which are a language acquisition and games that are designed at language acquisition. So it sounds very obvious that they might be the same thing when we put it like that, but the conclusion is that in infancy, learning a language is just like playing a game, so there's no coincidence that one might use games as a means to teach language, a native language. In the next two sentences, Wittgenstein declares that the two scenarios above, naming stones and requesting stones, also belong to the term language game. And finally, he includes the activities, even physical ones, such as going to fetch a stone, as a part of the language game. So language game is not really restricted to just words and linguistic behavior. It's also the activities that are a part of this whole like to go and get a stone, not just a call, but that you actually go and do a certain action along with it is also a part of the language game. So it's a notion that's broader than what we might usually think of what language is. Alright, so that's actually the entire paragraph done, and we're now in a position to see what I think is one very striking similarity between language and games. So here's a list I made of the constituents, you can say, of the builder's language. It contains two people, or at least two people, and they have specific roles, and that's builder and assistant. And they have a certain stock of actions, you could say, such as requesting. And then you can request slab or block, or like the action of requesting you do by saying the name of one of these stones. And the other action is to fetch one of those stones. And the language also contains certain items or objects, and that's the stones. And the goal of this whole activity is to retrieve the stones for the builder. So now we can just compare this with Monopoly. This is not an exhaustive description of Monopoly, but you can see that, at least you have to be two players, and you have certain roles, most being competitors, but you also have a bank. And there are certain moves you can do, such as buying, selling, pawning, rolling the dice, building property, and so on. And the items you have are houses, hotels, and those, cards that tell you to move to jail and whatnot. And then there are, of course, rules that go with the different items, such as you can't build an hotel before you have 4 houses. And the goal is to get all the monies. So we can see that there are a lot of different things that have to be in place for a word to have any use. And it's very similar to how a game might be organized. So again, there are several reasons for why Wittgenstein compared language to a game, and this is one of them. And that's it for this video. It was a preliminary introduction to one of his key terms, language games, and there's not any mention of it again until paragraph 23. And in the next paragraph, the language of the builders will be expanded upon and get some new types of words. Alright, bye for now.